Rendering, like lighting, is another one of those topics that amateurs often breeze right over. But the more skilled I get in 3ds Max, the more time I spend learning about rendering. Rendering, in a nutshell, is really just taking your creations in Max and making them pixels, either making a movie or a still image usually. But the method or methods that Max uses to create those pixels varies wildly. As you've seen, it's very easy to create an initial basic render by just hitting the F9 key. But as you can imagine, it gets significantly more powerful. To demonstrate this, let's open up the exercise files folder and then chapter 14. We have here two renders, a low quality render, which is basically akin to the renders that we've been doing so far, and an HQ, a high quality render. First of all, let's double click that low quality render to open that up. Now we have some basic lights in this scene. This scene, by the way, is in the advanced lighting folder that ships in the samples folder with Max. Now we're getting some really cool shadows over here, some interesting stuff going on with the lighting on top of this statue's head and whatnot, but still it's not very realistic. And I'll tell you why it's not very realistic. As we look at the floor, it's lit pretty nicely. But as we look at the wall, there's no light bouncing off from the floor to the wall. And in real life, light bounces. Look around right now in the room in which you're sitting. There are probably areas somewhere in the room where light is not directly hitting, but you can still tell what's going on there because light is bouncing off from other places into that area. So, using the same lights that we have in this scene, we could tell our rendering engine, in other words, the means by which we make our scene into pixels, we tell our rendering engine, hey, you know what? When light rays come out of light, bounce them around like it does in the real world. Doing so, as I close this, will yield in a much more realistic result. Let's double-click HQ Render to see how this looks. Wow. Folks, this is the exact same file, the exact same camera angle, and even the exact same lighting setup. The only difference between this and the low-quality render we just saw is the render settings that we're using. Again, let's go back to the old, and now let's look at the high quality. Looks absolutely beautiful. And we could probably spend a lot of time looking at this image and analyzing it and seeing how light is bouncing around. But suffice it to say, it looks significantly better. And again, the power of the realism has to do with the lighting setup and our render settings. So let's get talking about those render settings.